most common themes that I hear from people that I meet with is this feels like New York of, or this feels like the Silicon Valley of a certain time.
All right. So, I just want to start off, learn a little bit more about your early days as founders. And I think my question is, what were some of the things that you did or experienced in high school or college that you think contributed to your entrepreneurial mindset and abilities?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I don't think anyone's really ever asked me that before. For me, when I was in high school, I was the editor of the yearbook, and then when I was in college, I was the editor of the student newspaper, or one of them. And I think it was a really useful experience training me to run a large creative endeavor, which is, what a startup is. So that type of experience, kind of, an extracurricular, was probably more important to what I would eventually do as a founder than anything I learned in school.
For me, when I was in grade school, my father brought home a computer. He brought home a PC. He worked for AT&T, and he was able to bring home one of the PCs from work and a modem. And I was probably in 5th or 6th grade, and I started to play around with the computer and the modem. I started to program with Logo and BASIC and just kind of hack around. And I used the modem to call what were called bulletin boards at the time, BBSs. I don't know if anybody here remembers that time period, but it was sort of the predecessor to the internet. And it really just sparked my curiosity and sort of got my wheels spinning. So that was kind of the first thing for me that got me interested in technology and in kind of the early days of the internet. And then I, went to college, studied engineering and finance, and so that was sort of more kind of tech and more sort of business stuff. And I also in middle school I bought candy at the wholesale store and sold it to my classmates, even though it was against the rules. Don't tell anyone. It was sort of trying to make money on the side. So those are some of the things I did in my my early days that kind of were the early sparks for me.
And those early sparks eventually led to you founding StubHub. What were some of the experiences you learned just building that company?
Yeah, that's a big question. I would say one of the key things that I learned building StubHub, about hiring people was really that is much more important to focus on people's kind of innate characteristics, who they are as a person, more than what they had done. So things like curiosity and creativity and passion were much more important in hiring than where they had worked or what their resume said. And that was something that took me a little while to figure out. But I once I figured that out, I think it helped kind of hire the right people. And I think this is especially true in the very earliest days of a startup's life, because in that, in those first kind of 12, 18, 24 months, it's so critical to have, a tight team of people who can trust each other, work really well together, move fast, kind of run through brick walls and get a lot done. And it just works better when you have people who have that kind of same mindset and those same kind of innate characteristics. And it matters a lot less what they've actually done in the past.
Yeah, and StubHub eventually grew to be a massive company, and we always hear this concept of high growth companies and building high growth companies. For you, David, you were one of the founding CEOs of PayPal. You eventually went on to start Yammer. What are some lessons you could share with our audience about building and operating in a high growth startup?
Yeah, so I think to underscore what Jeff said, I think in the early days, what you really want is a team of smart generalists who have the capacity to learn, as opposed to hiring over-specialized experts who are already very kind of grooved in their career. Those people, it's think about a toolkit. They're a very, very specialized kind of tool. You don't even know if you need that set of expertise in the early days of a startup. So hire smart generalists who have the capacity to figure it out. And then over time, as you scale and you understand, what your product market fit looks like and what the company is, scaling towards, then you start to fill in these more specialized roles.
Yeah, and I mean, when you think about just like hiring generalists, like what would you share some of like the traits that stand out for like a generalist? You look at somebody like, this person might not have like a high specialty experience, but these like set you apart, having like knowing all things.
You really want people who you don't have to manage. Nobody in a startup has time to like manage like lots of other people. And so again, that comes down to people who have a good internal like motor, like they're self-motivated. And then also they can just figure things out for themselves. Like they'll figure out how to get something done. If you're needing to direct people at a task level because either they don't have the motivation or they don't know what to do, then that doesn't really work when you're a very lean team.
And Jeff, what are some of the things that you look for?
Yeah, I think it goes back to some of those innate characteristics like, curiosity, creativity, raw intelligence, work ethic, like these passion, right? So these are the things that when I was hiring in the early days of my startups, I would look for. These are a lot of the same characteristics that I look for when I talk to founders at Craft. And if you sit down with somebody for an hour and you talk to them and you ask them about their life experiences are and what their goals are, you can start to gauge, kind of where they fit on some of those different, on the spectrum of some of those different characteristics. So that's really what I've found is kind of key, especially in the early days of a startup, is getting people who kind of exhibit those characteristics, to a high degree.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this experience eventually culminated to you guys choosing to become venture capitalists. So why did you actually decide to get into venture?
Yeah, for me, so why did we get into venture, right? That was the question. Yeah, so for me, I've really just been passionate my whole career about, technology and software and building things. And, I had done it as an entrepreneur for most of my career, for, first 20 years of my career. And that's a lot of fun. And it could be a roller coaster ride. It's also very painful. I once said, like, when I started my second company, which was called Spreecast, that, it's like starting a second company is almost like having a second child. It's like the mom forgets how painful it was the first time, and that's the only way that they would ever even consider having the second child. So it's it's kind of like that, but it's fun and it's exhilarating, and so being an entrepreneur is great. But also, I got to the point in my career and with my family and where I just kind of had to hang up the gloves, kind of thing. And but I still wanted to stay close to. To tech and software and entrepreneurs and investing was a great way to do it. I had done a lot of angel investing prior to joining David at Craft, and that was a lot of fun. So it was really just kind of an extension of that.
How about you, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, similar for me. I just got to a certain stage in my career where I still love technology and great new products and being part of that, but I didn't want to, do the day-to-day work of operating and founding companies. And, in this business, if you're not going to be a founder, there aren't that many other roles. I mean, basically the business model for being an advisor or coach is to be a VC. The job is really to be an advisor. The business model is to be a VC. So that's how those things get combined.
And could you just share with us, like, what do you guys believe makes Craft special or unique compared to some of the other firms out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a few things. So first of all, Jeff and I were both founders ourselves, and that's the starting point. Is we both founded unicorn companies and led them from the first day till a successful exit. So right there are other VCs who've done that, but fewer than you would think. The other thing we've done is we tend to specialize in a couple of areas, SaaS and marketplaces, which are the areas that Jeff and I founded companies in. So Jeff, having founded StubHub, was one of the pioneers of e-commerce marketplaces. So Craft focuses on that. And then Yammer was one of the first bottom-up SaaS companies. And so that's the other area we focus on. So we have expertise in the areas that we actually invest in. And then we've built the entire craft team to provide services and support that's specialized for founders in those areas. So I think the fact that like Craft is so focused on helping a certain kind of startup makes us different than most VC firms, which are incredibly general. They're sort of more generalist.
The only thing I would add to that is the team that we have at Craft, so it's not just me and David, we have a whole team of builders. So everybody at Craft has built, companies. And so we have people who have worked at, startups that you've heard of, successful companies, and in different types of roles, product, marketing, legal, and sales ops. So we have a whole bunch of expertise and builders at Craft. And so I think it's not just being founders, but it's really the whole firm is builders. I think that also gives us a slightly different angle than lots of other firms.
Yeah, and can you, David kind of shared that one of the things you're focused on is marketplace companies. What gets you excited about a company like operating in that space?
Yeah, so in addition to sort of the sort of obvious things that I think are pretty general across lots of different types of companies, things like high growth and good capital efficiency and a great team, there are a few things that I look for specifically and that are more, I would say, specific to marketplace businesses. One is, I look for really strong network effects. So, network effects is this idea that as you get more supply, the product becomes more compelling for the demand side. And as you get more demand, the product gets more compelling for the supply side, right? Just by growing, the product gets better. So even if you added no new features or functions to the product, it actually just gets better by growing. So it's the so-called snowball dynamic. That concept actually isn't like the same across all marketplaces. And some marketplaces have a much stronger network effect and others and have a weaker network effect. So I like to look for businesses where I believe that network effect is especially strong. A second thing is I look for marketplaces that have a low risk of disintermediation. So a lot of times what happens, marketplaces are all about matching supply and demand, right? And so you make a match, you match the supply and the demand, but sometimes after you make that match for that first transaction, the second, the third, and the fourth transaction are vulnerable to disintermediation, which means that the demand and the supply are able to go direct to one another and cut out the middleman, right? And so they cut out the marketplace. They're able to, transact without paying a fee to the marketplace because they've already been matched. And so some marketplaces have a high risk of this disintermediation, and that's not good. So I look for marketplaces that don't have that risk. And then I would say, finally, I like to see marketplaces that have integrated payments where the payments actually flow through the marketplace. So the payment for the good or the service actually goes into the marketplace first and then goes out to the sort of supply side, as opposed to, there are some marketplaces that sort of make the match and they either have some other business model or they let the payments go outside the marketplace. And that tends to be harder to extract a take rate, to sort of enforce the take rate. And so I look for marketplaces that actually have the payment flows fully integrated. Those are kind of some of the things that are marketplace specific that I look for.
Yes, and I mean, David, you're focusing on these bottom-up SaaS companies. What are you looking for when it comes to like deals like those?
Yeah, so the starting point for us is always the metrics. And one nice thing about SaaS companies as an investor is that they're incredibly easy to benchmark. And so we've published all the benchmarks and the metrics that we're looking for. Well, I think one of my last blog posts on Substack was about the SaaS metrics that matter. And then we actually open sourced the tool. We created an in-house tool called SaaSgrid to basically create the charts for the correct metrics. And we've kind of open sourced that. You can just go to saasgrid.com and use the same tool that we do to generate your metrics. So that's always the starting point. And those metrics include things like obviously the growth rate and ARR, but also things like CAC and sales efficiency and capital efficiency, things like that. I'd say beyond that, the great thing about bottom up is that bottom up SaaS companies are ones where the employees adopt the software themselves. They're not waiting for the IT department to install it, or they're not waiting for some top down, order to use the product or some top-down sale. So that's the beautiful thing about bottom-up SaaS, is that the employees can act as consumers and pull it into their company. And that was really the entire thesis behind Yammer, which when we started doing that way back in 2008, 2009, is that we thought we could consumerize enterprise software and make it much more like the consumer products you use. And so when a product has that employee adoption, that's a beautiful thing. It makes sales so much easier when the employees are just organically, using the product. Yeah.
And I mean, one of the things we're kind of like talking about here, and I really want to get back into these tactics. When we're talking about deploying of capital, I think Miami has emerged as the new capital of capital. We have a really rapidly growing tech ecosystem, largely in part today because of a tweet the mayor made. Is it like 2 years ago? I don't even know. It feels like forever since we have a week every week. But the mayor made a tweet 2 years ago asking, how can I help? And that has prompted a significant number of entrepreneurs and investors to move here to Miami. So I actually thought a very special thing we could potentially do today. Mayor's here, right? Okay, he's almost here. All right, cool. I mean, we can still talk about Miami. I thought the thing we could do today is actually look into Miami and what's happening in the ecosystem. So, you guys are here for Tech Week. What do you see and what do you think about what's happening with Miami's ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's awesome. I think Mayor Suarez did an amazing job promoting the tech ecosystem here. There are others, Shervin, Keith Raboy, I don't know if he's here, but there's been a number of people who've been very active in promoting Miami. And, I think one of the things that COVID did was break the geographic network effect that the Bay Area had on tech, because now you can work from anywhere, you can found a company anywhere, and we're seeing that. It's tech is sort of distributing out beyond, it used to just be Silicon Valley. Now Silicon Valley is virtualized and tech is everywhere. And so Miami's become a very exciting ecosystem.
Yeah, I think the thing that I think is so great about Miami and why it's exciting is especially as you compare it to the Bay Area is just how welcoming the community has been and how welcoming the politicians have been. I mean, you talk about Mayor Suarez in that initial tweet and just how much that's kind of created this entire tidal wave that we've had with migration of I think tech and also I know I've couple hedge fund friends from New York who've moved here. So that's why I think the capital of capital is a great description, because it's not just tech, it's actually other types of capital. But if you look at the Bay Area and San Francisco, we haven't had the luxury of always being, the tech community hasn't always been so welcomed by other residents in San Francisco. And in fact, there's been a lot of animosity and resentment towards the tech community. There's been, I think, in some ways we're the scapegoats for rising housing prices and traffic problems in and around the city of San Francisco. And so to sort of juxtapose that against what we have here in Miami, I think it's a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, it's amazing how far that goes, just for the community to be welcoming instead of hating, the tech scene. So, yeah.
I mean, how do you think this momentum is very similar to the days when you were building PayPal in the Valley, and just the way the community was organizing and people were getting together and having these grassroots movements, really helping to propel the tech ecosystem?
I mean, you definitely feel the energy here, and it is like Silicon Valley back in the late 90s, early 2000s. You feel like the forming of critical mass, and everyone's excited about it. And, sadly, the politicians in San Francisco have been killing the golden goose. I mean, we're still living there. We haven't fully moved. I have a place here now in Miami, so I like spending time out here as much as I can. But yeah, I mean, look, San Francisco has taken the tech scene for granted for a long time, and they're killing the golden goose. I mean, every week the district attorney is denouncing me, and various other politicians are, like Jeff said, we're like the scapegoats, even though we have provided the wealth and the jobs for that city to do incredibly well. So I think Miami appreciates what the tech scene is doing for it here, and therefore it's being rational and encouraging it.
And there's very interesting question of the role like policy plays in building ecosystems. And I mean, we've heard the sentiment time and time again. The mayor's like the biggest ambassador for people moving here. Has made himself very accessible. Has like showed through his actions like his commitment to the ecosystem. So in contrasting both places, why haven't you moved yet?
Well, it all feeds on itself because an ecosystem needs several things. So you need investors, which clearly Miami now has. You need builders, and so founders and talent, technical talent, and it helps to have the support of the local politicians and community, and then infrastructure. So all these things are coming together and gelling for Miami in a big way. And I mean, look, I think 3 or 4 years ago, before COVID, really, Miami didn't have that. But just in the last 2 years, I think it's rocketed up the list to be a major tech hub. So it's pretty incredible. And one thing we've done, I don't know if I can mention this, but this building, we actually, I didn't do the work, but I'm a co-owner of this building now because I'm part of a syndicate by a group called Brick and Timber Collective that bought this building, and they're in the process of buying the Cube. And so, we're like actively investing in Miami and, this, the startup infrastructure that's being created here.
Yeah, and just I think a very helpful context is like this building. It's almost emerging to become like the heart of the migration to Miami. I mean, Founders Fund has an office here, Atomic has an office here, Ramp is building here, and Hack Week has our HQ here on the first round. We're facilitating these types of like connections and conversations. But what do you think is like the next big thing we need to be doing like in our community to really like hit that chasm, like get us to the next stage?
There's no substitute for success. I think that the more companies that Miami produces that are basically unicorns or go on to unicorn status, that's the most important thing, producing big winners the way that, the Bay Area obviously has this, year after year, there's, important companies being created. So just having more important companies being founded and scaling in Miami as its headquarters, I think is probably the most important thing you can do.
How about you, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the things, you made a comment earlier about, the policy that just, all it takes is like better policy. And I think in some ways it's even simpler than that. It just takes a tweet and you get this whole tidal wave of change. I think, just building on itself, right? You reach an inflection point and kind of a point of no return, which feels like Miami has hit that now. I agree with David. It kind of feels like, the late 90s here. You get, we got parties, we got, hack weeks, we got, a lot of energy. I remember San Francisco in the late 90s, and that was basically what it felt like. Now, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing because then 2000 happened, and that was not so great. But no, I just think it's like, continuing to invest, continuing to have that welcoming kind of tenor to everything, and I just think it continues and it snowballs.
Yeah, and I always love to call it the fact that what's happening in Miami today has been happening for years. There's incredible work that has gone into building and growing this ecosystem. So I see people like Matt Hagman in the room, who's played like a critical role in that, and I can't really see all their faces, but huge shout out to them. One of those people is Shervin Pishevar, who moved here back in 2017, long before the wave. And then today we have our mayor, the Honorable Francis Suarez, who has also been, Miami's biggest ambassador. So I just thought it would be a good idea to invite them to the conversation, and I'd love to have both of them join me on stage. So if you don't mind, just give me a hand to welcome Shervin Pishevar and Mayor Francis Suarez. Yeah, I'd love to just we could just jump right into it. So Shervin, I mean, you've been here, you've been building for years, you've been investing in local companies. Can you just tell us about Miami's momentum back in 2017 before you moved here, and what was that experience like?
Well, Francis and I were just talking about giving our good friend Irie, DJ Irie, the credit for introducing us, setting up the meeting when I moved here almost 5 years ago. Irie is originally from Jamaica, is a dear friend and angel investor, and I brought him into Uber in the first round that we did back in the day.
Check, check.
Is that better? Okay. So we're just giving some love to Irie, who's an angel investor and a dear friend. I brought him into Uber and a number of other companies, Hyperloop, which David and I were original co-chairman of. And he set up that first meeting 5 years ago, and that's where really the magic began. And I realized what an amazing leader our city has back then. And this Miami movement, a big part of it is we have one of the best leaders I've ever met, and I've met some great leaders in the world like Obama. And leadership matters. Leadership, oh, there it is. But leadership absolutely matters in all aspects, whether it's a company or a city. Without great leadership, there isn't this kind of momentum and drive and hope. This city, to me, represents the best of America, and you represent the best of American leadership. So, yeah.
Can I get that at a political advertisement?
And Mayor, sorry, nice play. I mean, you and Shervin collaborated on that billboard once you made that "How Can I Help" tweet. So, I mean, first, we'd love to hear that story of how the tweet came about.
Well, I'll tell both stories, because I think actually the second story is probably more interesting than the first story, because I've told the first story so many times about the tweet. The tweet was pretty uneventful in many ways. It was a Tuesday or Thursday, I forget which exact date of the week it was, and like many days with us, we all hustle. We get up early, we work hard. And at the end of the day, it's like 8 p.m., you're just exhausted. You just sort of like lay in bed and you're like a mummy, And I was going through my tweets and I see a tweet from a person I didn't know who worked for a company I didn't know, right? Which was, of course, Delian. And of course, the company was Founders Fund. And the tweet said, hey guys, what if we move Silicon Valley to Miami? Now, you have to understand that we have been trying to do this in Miami, and Matt and so many others who are in the room were part of creating this ecosystem for 10 years plus. This was a 10-year city passion project, creating this ecosystem. And so when the question was presented, I was like tripping over myself, right? To say, how can I help? And how can I help? I didn't know it was the VC calling card, right? I didn't know, it was really just a sort of a natural way that I would answer any question. Anyone who knows me, right, who comes to visit me in my office, whether you're, an elderly person that needs any kind of a help with an electricity bill or whatever, the answer to the question is always the same. The difference was there was a counter narrative that was happening in urban America, right? Urban America was pushing tech out, was pushing innovation out, was sort of saying to people, we don't want you to, we're not gonna put a premium on success. And we're gonna blame successful people for all the societal things that are happening in our city, homelessness, crime, etc. And I think it was refreshing to many to see, wait a second, this guy wants us here. And I think, to me, it was a huge lesson in understanding the very simple fact that people want to be wanted. They want to be appreciated, particularly when they're trying to do things that change the world. So that's number one. But the number two part was the billboard, which was really fun. And so Shervin calls me one day and he says, hey man, I got an idea. And I can't imitate his voice, it's hard. He says, I have this idea. What if we put up a billboard in San Francisco? This was totally his idea. Totally his idea. And so, I said, okay, cool. That sounds like a cool thing. So let's game plan this out, right? So we had a creative team and the billboard company, and everybody starts like putting out these things. And I said, well, what if we just make it like a basic tweet, right? And we sort of mock a tweet. And obviously we came up with, and he came up with and the team came up with this idea of saying, thinking of moving to Miami, DM me. And I'll tell you a second, I don't think I've ever told you this part of the story. So I get a call. I love telling stories. I realize in life, you better be good at telling stories, because if you're not good at telling your story, someone else is going to tell your story, and you're not going to like their version of it. So I never told you this part of the story. So I get a call one day from Christina Aguilera's common law husband, boyfriend. He's laughing. You know him? He runs a company called Masterclass. Have you guys ever heard of Masterclass, right? And so he invites me over to his house. He had rented this house in Miami Beach. I never told you this part of the story. And he says, you know, I run this company called Masterclass, you know, and I get all these incredible people to talk about like how to be incredible, right? And I've hired all these high-priced Nike executive advertising guys that are like super expensive. And I go into this advertising meeting, and these guys, all they're talking about, women, I'm sure, all they're talking about is this mayor of Miami who's put up this billboard in San Francisco and how cool it is and guerrilla marketing. And the first thing that came to mind is, what the hell am I paying these people all this money if this is the guy that's coming up with the good ideas, you know? So he's like, I'm in Miami, I had to meet this guy. And so, you know, I told him the story of how it all sort of came together, but that was a sort of a little side vignette on that story that I've actually never told publicly. So, very cool.
That's so cool. And I'd never heard that story, but that was such a fun project. Anyone that needs billboard designs, come to me, free of charge. No, but this was, we put this strategically in front of Uber and Airbnb on 280, and your DMs blew up, right?
So part of the reason, I don't know if anybody from my Venture Miami team is here. If you are, just raise your hand. I don't see you. But I created something that I call the back office. So it became evident very quickly that one human being was not going to be able to take all the inbound that was coming to Miami as a result of this, right? DM me. So we built a team called Venture Miami, and I was very blessed to have so many people. And obviously, Shervin was a big part of the creation of it and the putting it together. And Sarah, who's here, I think I saw there she is, helped us put this together. And the idea was we needed to do everything. We needed to create a concierge service. We needed to let people know what the incentives were. We needed to teach them how to get their driver's license and even stand in line for them if we had to. You know, whatever it took to rocket ship and moonshot this moment and create it into a movement that would stick and that would redefine the world and redefine how we were viewed in the world and rebrand us. So that's why we put together this team, and then we started doing these Cafecito Tech Talks, which David did with me outside in the patio of City Hall, and Shervin did as well, and made a big donation pledge, and we had over 200 Cafecito Talks because we wanted to tell our story.
The greatest thing about the mayor is he's a startup CEO of a city, and what he's done here is growth hacking for a city, and that's why the city is growing so fast. And one of the things we also talk about is making sure that opportunity is democratized and available for everyone in the city. And we learn from the mistakes in places like San Francisco, where we become a positive part of this city, and economic opportunity is spread to every corner, to all the schools that we're now working on, you know, bringing tech and programming and bringing code.org and other organizations here to teach kids how to program. This has to be not a marketing win, but a substance win. And with people like David and Jeff and the rest of the team here they've brought into Miami, Founders Fund and Keith and Jack, substance is happening, company creation is happening, and that's gonna really develop deep roots in this city.
I was going to add that, we did an event for Mayor Suarez. Was it last year? I guess it was several months ago in San Francisco, and it was the biggest turnout I've had for an event. I mean, we've had senators and governors and the whole thing, but you had by far the biggest turnout that I think we've ever gotten for a political event, and so there's a tremendous curiosity, even in San Francisco, about what you've done here. And the question that came up over and over again at that event was, how do we get a mayor like you in San Francisco? So
Thank you. So since then, I became the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. So I'm president of all the mayors in the country. So in effect, I'm sort of like the mayor of San Francisco, without any jurisdictional authority. So I can't take the blame for anything that goes wrong there. But yeah, it's really humbling to go to different cities and have their residents who are, deeply invested in those communities say, hey, we'd love to have you. Think of moving and running for office here. So I got to find creative ways to be able to represent a larger part of this country.
So what do we think is next for Miami, everyone?
Teaser alert.
Well, I mean, as you guys all know, I mean, startups are the future job creators of the economy. They create all the dynamism, they create all the innovation. Otherwise, it would just be big, Fortune 500 corporations. So all the upward mobility, again, all the dynamism in our economy, what makes the United States unique compared to every other country is what startups do. And so it shouldn't be refreshing. Every government should be our partner in what we're trying to create, but it is, for some reason, it's become unusual. And so that's why what you've done, Mayor, is so important. And I wish more people would copy what you've done.
And I want to say something that I think is important. I hope it comes off in the right way. We can't demonize industry. 160 million Americans work in the private sector. 20 million of those 140 million work in the private sector. 160 million people in the workforce, and 20 million of those 160 million work in government. And we cannot demonize the private sector for trying to innovate and create solutions to problems on a profitability model and say that they're the cause of these societal issues. That's not fundamentally right. It's not fundamentally American, in my opinion. And I think, some of the things that we deal with as societal issues like income inequality, right? It's generational. I mean, it's just something that's been going on since the beginning of humanity. These are not easy problems to solve. If they were easy to solve, we would have solved them a long time ago and we would be done with it. And the most bastardized way of trying to solve them is to say, let's just grow the size of government. Right? And my parents, I just want you to know contextually, my parents were exiled from their country of birth. My dad came when he was 12, my mom when she was 7, because a charismatic leader in that country said to the people of that country, just give me your homes and give me your businesses, and don't worry, I'll make everybody equal. I'll take care of everybody. And he did. He made everybody equal. He made everybody equally miserable. He accomplished that goal phenomenally well. And that system of government has always accomplished that goal in the history of humanity, making people equally miserable. And so I'm reminded of the Winston Churchill quote that says, democracy may be the worst form of government except for all the others, right? Because, obviously people are using democracy against us to try to divide us and try to focus on the things that we may disagree on, when fundamentally there's a lot more that we agree on.
And Mr. Mayor, I know you have a busy schedule today. So before you guys go, I just love to know, from your lens, what's next for Miami and where do we go from here? Shervin said he invested in the seed round of Miami, and I guess you guys are invested in the growth stage. So where do we go from this point?
I'll tell you, it's interesting, and I want to hear Shervin's perspective on this. If you go anywhere in the world, forget about Miami, anywhere in the world, they're talking about the same things. They're talking about artificial intelligence. They're talking about quantum computing. They're talking about biotech. They're talking about green tech. They're talking about fintech and crypto. Everybody's talking about the same things. So the truth is, he was saying something that I thought was very profound, which is the Miami story is about hacking our way to the top. Right? And we're going to continue, Miami Hack Week, we're going to continue to hack our way to the top. To the extent that our competitors don't go to work, we're going to get up early and we're going to work hard to continue to hack our way on these industries that we know are going to propel the future. It's not rocket science, guys. We're not Elon Musk here. We're not sending rockets and landing them backwards. This is stuff that we know. We know where the world is going. Everybody knows it, by the way. In Middle East, they know it. In Asia, they know it. Everybody knows it. So it's a race to that point. And the question is, how quickly can you get there, and how can you motivate people to go in the same direction?
Absolutely. I think Miami represents to me the perfect product market fit for this moment in time. It is attracting so much talent, human capital. And over the last 5 years, I've introduced so many of my friends to the mayor, and he immediately responds, meets them, shows them neighborhoods where they can live with their family. I mean, again, one of the greatest leaders I've seen, and that's led to so many conversions. And what we're seeing is, like, when I moved here, I needed to see if I could create companies here. So we created a team, Edison Companies, and we started to incubate. We incubated Bolt with Usain Bolt. My sister Sarah was the co-founder and CEO. We founded Sizzle, a cloud kitchen company that sold to GoPuff. We have Coachera, which Sarah has started as a SaaS business in coaching that's growing really fast. We have 10 different incubation projects just in Miami. And now Jack's here with Atomic, and Keith is funding companies, and they started Open Store. Everything is possible here. And first you need an environment that is welcoming and weather that's pretty amazing. And everything is possible from that point.
Can I just make two quick observations? One is, one of the most common themes that I hear from people that I meet with is, this feels like New York of, or this feels like the Silicon Valley of a certain time. So there's something special. And the second thing is, I mean, this has been Miami Tech Month, right? There is no place on the planet that has dedicated a month to technology, on the planet. And what's exciting about it is not just that, but every event that I've gone to has been standing room only. And frankly, I don't recognize a lot of the faces that I'm seeing in the audience. I don't know a lot of the people. I know some of you, but not all of you, which is actually very exciting for me, because that means there's a lot more friends to make. And that means that the diversity of the growth of this ecosystem is so strong that it's being refreshed constantly. It's not like I'm going to events where I'm seeing the same people at every event. I'm seeing new people, different people, and that's very exciting for me. It's motivating, actually.
I know this is where we have to run, so thank you so much for your time.
Question for you would be, what do you recommend for someone who's going for a Series A fundraising right now in terms of strategies? Obviously things are kind of settling down again. We're going into a lull period. Would you say that people shouldn't fundraise as much as possible? Should be more conservative? Should they try to go for a little bit more of a, more of a standard round instead of going to like a blowout, $100 million valuation round? So trying to get your thoughts on what you would say for a Series A right now.
I'm sure we both have thoughts on this. I'll give it a couple of quick things. Number one, we're definitely in a downturn right now. This is not like just a lull. We're in, like, once every 7 to 10 years, you get like a major downturn that lasts 18 months. This is what it feels like. There's a major price reset happening right now. Good companies, good startups will still get funded, but I think the reality is valuation levels are coming down, certainly over where they were 6 months ago. And the reason for that is just look at the public markets. You look at IPOs, SPACs, growth stocks, SaaS companies, they're all off a lot, like 50, 70, 80%. So eventually those public comps have to trickle down to private pricing as well. So I think everyone should just be aware of that. And I would say, in terms of your fundraising strategy, number one, you're probably going to need to talk to more firms than you normally would. So in other words, like, open the funnel, because it's not like the days where you meet with 3 investors and people just throw term sheets at you. It's going to take more time and effort. Number two, don't mention like a price. Like, I see a lot of founders price themselves out of the market by throwing out a valuation that, frankly, like, if you mention a valuation and it's way above what the market thinks, a lot of VCs just won't dig in or look at your round. So you can only price yourself out by talking. You have the right answer to valuation is whatever the market decides as a result of a process. So don't price yourself out. And then the other thing, and this goes to your question, is if the investor asks you how much do you want to raise, if you mention a crazy amount of money, that, oh, I want to raise $30 million, and it's a Series A, where Series A should be like $7 to $10 million. That's like mentioning a crazy valuation. You're going to price yourself out of the market. So, founders could get away with tactics like that a year ago when things were super hot, but it's not stuff you want to do in a down market.
Yes, I would add a couple things. things. I think the mood in the room just changed with that question. I feel like everything was like super happy and fun, and then we just asked that question, and now it's like back to reality. Yeah, there's no doubt that things have changed, and I agree with David. I think this isn't just like a short-term reset. I think in a lot of ways this is normal, right? What was abnormal was in many ways what happened in kind of 2020 and 2021. So the prices got a little bit out of hand, both in the public markets and also in the private markets. So I think we're kind of in a way back to normal now. So I think, if I were a CEO of a company right now, I would, kind of try to be more conservative with my cash and try to make it go as long as possible. I would probably try to trim things that I didn't absolutely need, both in terms of like marketing initiatives as well as potentially, potentially people. No one likes to do headcount reductions, but sometimes, if you have fat, it's a good time to sort of think about, trimming that. And I think, if you have to raise capital, you should probably do it now versus waiting, because I think it's likely to get a little worse before it gets better, right? If the U.S. economy goes into a recession, which I think everybody's sort of, all the economists are starting to increase those probabilities of recession. Maybe it's still not 50, but it was 20, and now it's 40% chance. So I think, probably to raise now if you have to. If you don't have to raise for 12 or 18 months, you might wait it out a little bit. Those are the key things that I would think about.
Cool. Yeah. So I think one thing I want to throw in is that the both of you actually built companies during downturn. Are there any actual advantages to building a company during a time like what we're seeing now?
Yeah, I think that's a great point to raise. I founded Yammer in 2008, and we had very shortly after that, we had the whole, 2008, 2009 real estate crash, the whole, mortgage bubble that blew up and became the subject of the movie The Big Short, and then that led to a recession. It was a very serious downturn. Also, PayPal was largely built after the crash in 2000. So you can absolutely build great, fantastic startups and tech companies during downturns and recessions. In fact, it gets easier in many ways because you have fewer competitors getting funded and there's fewer companies competing for talent. So the herd gets thin a little bit, and that can actually be advantageous. The only thing that gets harder during a downturn is fundraising. So to Jeff's point, make your money last, don't squander it, try to lengthen your runway, and then when you do need to raise, run a tight fundraising process, get organized, have all your materials done ahead of time, broaden your funnel, don't do things to price yourself out of the market. Whenever we give advice like this, people sometimes say, David, you're just talking your book because you as a VC want to pay lower valuations. And it's not true because we actually don't set the valuation. The valuation gets set as a result of a process. And we just pick the companies we want to be in, and then the market basically tells you what the valuation is going to be. So we're price takers in good markets or bad markets. And, like last year, we were price takers at a high level. This year, the price was being lower. We're still price takers. This is the same advice I give to all my portfolio companies that are going out fundraising right now. I promise you, this is the environment you're going to see, this year compared to last year. And, the fact that I'm a VC I'm not talking my book. This is really what's happening, basically.
So I'd add just a couple things, just my own experience, my own story. So I started StubHub in March of 2000. And that was, I don't know if people remember, some people may not be old enough to remember, but that was literally the month before the 1.0 bubble burst, right? The internet 1.0 bubble burst in April of 2000. So I was a first-year student in business school and decided to start this, ticket marketplace. And we incorporated in March of 2000, and then the bubble burst, and all of the internet stocks in the public markets came down like 80 or 90% in the course of, it was sort of a protracted downturn, so it lasted a year or two, but when it was at the lows, a lot of those companies went out of business. But, and so my DNA as a founder at the time was very much about just conserving cash, because there's three key things you have to do as a founder, right? You have to hire great people, you have to get customers, and you have to raise capital. And two of those three things actually get easier, but raising capital is very hard in those times. And so, I talked to like everybody who had a checkbook, and nobody wanted to give us any money. Angel investors, VC investors, no one would write a check into StubHub at the time. So we like scraped together some early family and friends kind of capital in a couple of rounds. But we were super frugal with our money in those first couple of years, because it was very difficult to get any money. And so the thing that, the story I'm going to tell you, the conclusion of this story is that there was actually an article written about StubHub in that time frame, like 2001 or 2, I think. The title of the article, I think it was I forget what the publication was. It was a big publication. But the title of the article was, "Frugality is this startup's ticket." And so it had to play on the word ticket because we were a ticket company, but the point was that we were cheap bastards, and that is not necessarily something you want to be known as, right? Like, you got founders who are dynamic and interesting and smart, but we were known as being cheap bastards. So, not something I'm necessarily proud of, but I do think it's important, in downturns to kind of make money last and to be, and to be conservative with cash.
My experience, I just want to echo what they're saying. We've been through the downturns, and each time in the downturns, if you look at the companies that were created and the companies that survived the downturns, they became really great, well-disciplined, well-run companies. If you look at Amazon, a lot of people thought Amazon was done in the dot-com crash, and they persevered. They created AWS. They continued to scale. Facebook was started February 4th, 2004, when nobody was paying attention. And so my greatest returns, I've been VC since 2011 and 83x, have been coming through finding companies that are that disciplined. And one of the things I think we're suffering through right now is the oversupply of mega funds, where it's a fee-driven business, not just a returns-driven business. And so the bigger and bigger the funds get, the less discipline they get about how many billions of dollars are pouring into companies at crazy valuations. And a lot of that becomes unsustainable as soon as you hit a wall, like what we're hitting right now. You have inflation, you have a potential recession, you have oil and gas prices, you have a lot going on, you have a war happening in Ukraine. A lot of risks are happening, and the market is contracting, as we've seen, not just the public markets, but the private markets. And so in that, that doesn't mean that it's not a great time to start a company. That's the irony of that. It's actually, as David said, and Jeff said, some of the best times to start companies are when you have to be disciplined, when you do have to conserve capital, and you do also have to stay focused instead of trying to compete with your competitors who just raised a mega round and you think you have to do that to win. It's a long race, and that's some of the lessons that we've learned.
Hi, I have the mic.
You win.
So this question is for any of you guys. I'm Evan, I'm the founder of Drift Bio. We're making the cloud for biology. So one thing we encountered at our pre-seed that we don't want to encounter when we go out for our seed next year is that we had a lot of things that people really liked, but there was a category of investors who were kind of uncomfortable with the market we're selling into. And a lot of times it's because they got burned by a company, they had a friend who got burned, maybe they'd never invested in a company that sells into that market, but they'd heard a few things, and so they just kind of shut down. In our case, it's biology, people just heard bad things about big pharma. But the market's changed in a very significant way. There are companies like Benchling that have blazed a trail. There's a big biotech market that you can sell into that doesn't have the same long sales cycles. There are a lot of proof points that you can point to. And we're obviously very early stage, So for us, the progress points are more technical right now than market-based, but for someone like us who's kind of earlier, trying to raise capital for a more early stage deal and selling into a market that's changed in a significant way that makes it really favorable in a way that it wasn't before, what would you advise for us to make those investors believe that the market is a lot more favorable than it used to be, or maybe identify it early so that we can avoid some of those people?
I mean, I guess the one thing I would say, you touched on a point that your milestones are more technical now than, I guess, revenue-based. I think if you can, I mean, it sounds like your next round is going to be a seed round, and so maybe you don't yet have to have revenue, but anything you can do to launch a product, get some users, maybe it's pre-revenue users, show some usage, show some metrics of those users, that there's engagement, that there's, you know, growing usage, even if it's in a pre-revenue state, like those kind of metrics that are more quantifiable than just building kind of technology milestones will be helpful. Some industries that's like really hard to do until you raise like tens of millions of dollars, like you know, self-driving cars or something, or robotics. But if you have the ability to start to get some proof points of users, or even design partners, customers who want to be your design partners who you're working with, who can kind of reference the need for what you're building and you as a team, those types of proof points I think can be very helpful. Especially in markets, you know, like what we're in now, where there's a bit of a change in the mood, and also as you get later, right, that becomes more important. So you may still be early enough because you said you're still doing a seed round next, but you know, as you get to the A and the B, there's every stage that gets more and more important. There's only so long that you can be, you know, building tech and not having revenue, users and revenue and things like that.
Yeah, customer references are so important. I mean, in addition to looking at all of your numbers, that's after the numbers, the references are the most important thing. We will call your customers and see what they think. So having happy customers who are referenceable, it's important for investors, it's important for your marketing. You'll use those anecdotes and quotes, testimonials. You should then take them and then market those. So yeah, really, really important. Read chapter 3 of Benioff's book, Behind the Cloud, on marketing. Customer testimony is your most powerful weapon that you have in marketing. People are obviously going to be skeptical of any claims you make about yourself, but if a customer is saying it, then it must be true. So customer testimony, get those references. That's the most important thing you can be doing. Happy customers.
Okay, cool. All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time. See you guys in August 0 through 7. Thank you, everyone.